Pakistan? What is the nature of the state in Pakistan? Why? And how has the military, but specifically the army, come to occupy such a preeminent place in Pakistani society, so much so that it has been noted, unfairly, that Pakistan might even be thought of as an army in search of a state? Is the Pakistani state a failed state, a military state, an emergent state, a terrorized state? Note, I did not say terrorist state. What has been the role of the outsider, the US, India, Afghanistan, the Soviet Union, now Russia, in Pakistan's political history over the past 50 years? How should Pakistan deal with political Islam, jihadi politics? How might Indian-Pakistan relations move from confrontation to conciliation? Our Mahomedali Habib Distinguished Lecturer today, Dr. Ayesha Siddiqa, political analyst, public intellectual and scholar, has written copiously on all of these subjects, and it is my very great pleasure to introduce her to you. Dr. Siddiqa took her PhD from King's College London in War Studies, and she has been the Director of Naval Research for 11 years, making her the first woman and civilian to occupy such a position in Pakistan. I would venture anywhere in South Asia. I would actually extend that beyond the boundaries of South Asia. I don't know where women are directors of naval research. She's also been at the Woodrow Wilson Center in 2004 and 2005, during which years I believe she was working on an extraordinary book. Departing from conventional scholarship in Pakistan, Dr. Siddiqa published Military Ink. Not ink as in siyahi, that with which you write, but Military Incorporated. Bringing many of the questions with which I began this introduction together, Dr. Siddiqa gives us a very fine-grained analysis and demonstration of indeed how the army controls the state, but without focusing on the obvious, the arms build-up, the number of officers, the size of the army, and so on and so forth. Instead, as she demonstrates, the army in Pakistan is a billion-dollar capitalist conglomerate. The army, simply put, is perhaps one of the most successful capitalist organizations in the country. Dr. Siddiqa's focus in Military Inc. is what she has called MILBIZ, military-run business ventures. These range from small to massive, owned and operated by 4 military welfare organizations: the Fauji Foundation, the Army Welfare Trust, the Shaheen Foundation, and the Bakhle Foundation. These 4 foundations between them, which is to say, the army, owns and operates profitable businesses. Businesses such as shopping malls, sugar mills, farms, banks, movie theaters, an airline, radio and television channels, advertising agencies, real estate agencies. Beginning in 1954, Siddiqa argues, the army moved into the economy. But it is an elite and shadow economy, its budget not subject to the usual regulatory mechanisms of the state. MILBIZ, as Dr. Siddiqa puts it, has produced as well not a middle class, but a middle income class that benefits significantly from it. This Praetorian army, as she calls it, the capitalist billionaire, this is what we need to scrutinize and recognize as the economic predator to be tackled in the move forward. Why, you might ask? Is there a link between the rise of such military autonomy and religious extremism? In Indonesia and Turkey, nations that are used by Siddiqa as comparative foils for this work, the armed forces have not simply supported, but systematically strengthened the religious right to bolster their own control of state and society. And Siddiqa hints that this has indeed been one of the prices Pakistan has paid for MILBIZ. Given all this, what is the future of democracy in Pakistan? Scholars such as Akbar Zaidi are pessimistic, not seeing the various stakeholders in Pakistani society with anything to gain from such moves. Others, such as Ayesha Jalal, less so, unwilling to give up hope, as she said recently in an interview about 7 days ago. Umeed pe hi log jeete hain, she said. People live by hope. At any rate, unless the economic predatoriness of the army is confronted, argues Dr. Siddiqa, there is no moving forward in the conversation. relying on the middle income class will not do. So how then might one compel the army, as it were, a not insignificant force, to return to its barracks and to its field stations and leave the markets alone? Here too, Dr. Siddiqa has a counterintuitive argument. Where Pakistan is concerned, she writes, the drive has to come both from a strong domestic and popular movement inside Pakistan. This is not so surprising. But, she says, that drive needs an equally strong outside supporter. Today, Dr. Siddiqa will speak to us about religion, state and society in Pakistan, searching for identity in an ex-colonial state and elite circulation. Please join me in extending a very warm welcome to Dr. Siddiqa.
Dr. Bakhle, thank you so much for the generous introduction. All when I wanted to forget military ink, you reminded me of it. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here. I'm extremely grateful to the Institute of South Asian Studies for inviting me here. Let me join Rizvi Sahab in thanking Punita and other colleagues, Minali, and because they've really taken care of me. The food and fruit basket in a room, prompt pickup from the airport. It's perfect. Nothing feels better than a warm welcome. And right when somebody like me gets a bit unnerved and begins to lose breath because in face of a subtle, what I call intellectual apartheid in Pakistan, so grateful that Habib University is there to remind me that one must not give up hope on continuing to have conversation. Conversation is important. It's important to say things as you see them. It's important to talk about it, irrespective of what the consequences are going to be. And this is what I plan to do today. What I thought I'll talk about today is looking at religion, state and politics. How elite circulation, and we've had 4 cycles of elite circulation in Pakistan since Pakistan was created in 1947. How does elite circulation and identity, Pakistani identity, how does it come together? To very quickly quote from Vilfredo Pareto, the Italian who wrote about elite formation, the theory of elite formation, the rise and fall of elite. Quote, when religious humanitarian sentiments are rising, the old elite becomes softer, milder, more human and less apt to defend their power. So there is a theory right there of how religion and elite circulation interacts. And I'm going to shed some light of whatever I've learned about the process, how it's been in 68 years of Pakistan's existence. The questions which I plan to ask are, is Pakistan's ideological identity changing? I mean, we keep hearing about it. Pakistan was once liberal, not so liberal. What is the shift? What is this shift? How is it happening? How is it programmed? Is it a result of an outgrowth of simple tactical matters like lack of education and poverty? If we change that, will situation become indifferent and thus, temporary? Or is it a much longer and a permanent shift that we are seeing? What is it? What is the link between power and political and religious and political legitimacy drive through religious identity? Or is it a structure, what I said earlier, more permanent, a structure inherited from birth? But before I start talking about Pakistan, let me share with you a story of another country which is very dear to my heart. And I'm referring to Sri Lanka. And what I want to share with you, I mean, there's a lot of commonality that I see between Pakistan and Sri Lanka. Both I see as predatory states with predatory elites. But what I remember from Sri Lanka is my visit, the first visit, which I ever undertook in 1977 with my parents, of course. And it was a delight being there. I mean, it was very impressive. I mean, just imagine 1977 going from Pakistan, the literacy rates were really low. And here was Sri Lanka with 98% literacy. Even the beggars would be reading English newspapers. So that was very amazing. Later on, many years later, I went to work there for my research. I mean, I was doing comparative civil-military relations in South Asia, so I went and spent some time in Sri Lanka. 2006, I noticed things had changed. I mean, even the tuk-tuk wala, I mean, in a country which gets a lot of tourists, for a tuk-tuk wala, it would be difficult to understand English. English was an advantage. It gave them an advantageous position, which they had lost. And that was because in 1977, way back, the leadership had changed the policy then. And they'd gone from a multilingual state to a Sinhala-only policy. And so in 2006, you could see that effect. But losing that advantage is not the only thing which I saw Sri Lanka losing. There was much more that was lost. The war and violence which came with it. I mean, that language policy was just a demonstration of what else had been destroyed by a leadership which was so focused on their own interests, which would kill. And so the war and mayhem that you saw was a natural impact of what people had been taught, the culture, the identity, the shifts that have been brought in so many years. Now the reason I tell you the story is because I saw something which was similar in Pakistan. And let me narrate to you another story. Very recently, I went to do some interviews, and this particular set of interviews was with these new set of schools that have come up, which are modern schools. They do O-levels, A-levels, very modern. But I call them fourth-generation madrasas. I started talking to one of the teachers, and she was trying to ask her. I said, there is your school, there is this school, that school, there's so many of them. So what is different about you? I mean, I said, no, we are much more Islamic than the other. I said, what is more Islamic about you? What makes you, and she was trying to explain to me the intricacy, of the differentiation between the other schools and their school, and her school. She said, listen, ours is a Montessori, ours starts with a Montessori, and in Montessori, we teach the children, when we teach them art, we make sure that we teach them art the Islamic way. I said, what do you mean teach them art the Islamic way? She said, well, we teach them not to make eyes and nose, and mouth of any living organism. So I said, but you have O-levels, so they do come across photographs of people with full faces and all of that. And she said, no, but we make sure that until they reach class 5th, we've indoctrinated them to a degree that even if they see photographs, it just does not matter. And trust me, ladies and gentlemen, I felt cold. I felt breathless. I mean, just imagine a generation which will come out of the system. The images, images teach you a lot. The world that you create around yourself is what then shapes your identity and your reality. And so, what I saw in Lahore, I have some very interesting photographs for you. This is a tuk-tuk, a rickshaw in Lahore, which says, God's religion is Islam, and the other side it says devil's religion is secularism. Or this one which reads, leave democracy and follow Khilafat. Now, and these are common sites, these are common photographs, these are common advertisements which you see behind this private-public kind of transport. This talks about blasphemy and many more. Of course, you do come across, and by the way, what has also happened, and this is from Lahore, which is a very vibrant, which is a town with a lot of vibrant economic activity, which also reminds me of the theory espoused by people like Wali Nasser when he talks about a middle class in the Muslim world, reducing, and how that active entrepreneurial class is likely to look at the world in a different way. And when I look at these photographs, at these images, I see, I see a disconnect in Wali's argument there. Now, of course, you would see these kind of photographs as well of Indian actors and actresses. But the more prominent messaging that you see around is this one. There is something which is changing in the world around me, and it would be sad if I don't notice it. So the question, and so one of my arguments, I think my primary argument therefore is that Pakistan is what I call, is now what I call a hybrid theocracy, where rising economic liberalism and forever narrowing pockets of social cultural liberalism goes side by side with formal implementation of Sharia in some sectors or territories, but then even larger spaces for informal implementation of Sharia law. But the question is, how has it happened? Is it something new that we are looking at? Or is it something old which is being recreated? So, I mean, initially I thought of using the term existential redefinition. But the question which I ask myself is it really redefinition? Or is it re-emphasizing something which had already been there? And the answer depends on how you look at the process of Islamization and radicalization in the country. What I've done is I've tried to use two frameworks, available existing frameworks. One my own, another belongs to the Israeli sociologist Yuri Ram. When he looks at, Yuri Ram uses the state perspective to look at how the right wing has an increased influence in Israel. So on the right, on your left is what I call is a framework to assess changes in the society, and to the right is the changes that the state has been undergoing. Pakistan, in my eyes, has shifted from 1947-49 from a weak nationalism, weak religionism, and I'll explain these terminologies to you shortly. In 47-49 to a weak nationalism, proto-strong religionism, and 49-74 to weak nationalism, strong religionism, and we are now at a stage, 2001 to date, when it is proto-strong nationalism, strong religionism. Another kind of state is being, another kind of state, another kind of identity is being defined. Now, very quickly, let me take you through Yuri Ram's model. What his definitions mean. Strong nationalism, weak religionism is case of a dominant and energetic secular nationalism. Culturally, it may appropriate some existing religious symbols, but it remolds them to fit the new secular national culture. Institutionally, religious institutions are either entirely separate or subordinate to the state. Strong nationalism, strong religionism means this is the case of a fusion between strong nationalism and strong religionism, which creates a kind of indissoluble mesh of religious nationalism. Then you have weak nationalism, weak religionism, a polity which is not founded upon strong pre-political primordial or descriptive national religious communal identity, but is rather constitutionally, contractually oriented. Weak nationalism, strong religionism, on the other hand, historically this combination represents pre-modern and thus pre-national cultures in which religion was pervasive as a communal identity. Presently, this combination can represent a type of communal post-nationalism or transnational fundamentalism. Very quickly, moving to the other model, which is looking at the societal changes. Now, here I see Pakistan shifting from pre-radicalism, and this is how any society would move. Pre-radicalism is identity politics, where a particular identity, national identity is associated with a particular religion. You move on to the society, that kind of society moves on. And so, at the pre-radicalism stage, in which linking of religion with polity to define a state's identity sets the stage for ensuing changes. Using religion as core national identity and politicization of this means making religion as the grand norm. Depending on how a political and social system supports the anchoring of a particular ideology or grand norm, the society moves to the next stage of latent radicalism, a condition in which the certain belief system is consciously and deliberately generated, which puts people in peculiar and separate boxes in terms of their communal identity. At this stage, a certain belief system is consciously and deliberately generated, which puts people in peculiar and separate boxes in terms of their identity. Although many consider this as conservatism, this is actually latent radicalism. People do not necessarily get violent at this stage, but their perception of the other begins to change. They tend to believe in discrimination on the basis of an ideology or faith as a natural process. At this stage, popular myths are developed to condemn the other, and psychological barriers are created against certain population groups or in favor of your own kind. There is a tendency to be exclusive instead of inclusive vis-a-vis other communities on the basis of your religious belief. Such an attitude forces people to develop bias against an individual, a community, a subgroup, or a nation on how faith is interpreted for them. The state itself becomes programmed to differentiate amongst its citizens on the basis of religion. Then the next shift comes, then we move to active radicalism. The result of this latent radicalism is active radicalism. This is the cycle of political legitimacy is fully programmed around ideological differentiation between groups on the basis of faith. So the social-political structure becomes in tune with ideological bias. The myths against the other turns into a reality and becomes socially and politically profitable to identify with myths against select group of people. The actual expression of radicalism may still not be done by the entire population, but selectively. However, violence, on the other hand, will happen only on a need-be basis. So, in order to have violence, violence is not, violence can be, even at this stage, at the stage of active radicalism, violence can still be controlled. But what is important to understand is that you have to have that pool, this large pool of radicalism, which anybody can then, turn the tap on and off on a need-be basis. Now, let me go back historically and see how did this change happen? I mean, the state society, the two sides of the divide, how did we get there? I mean, if you look at the recent work by Dr. Ayesha Siddiqa, she, for instance, argues in her book, her recent book, Pakistan, a Muslim Homeland and Global Politics, that radicalism is indeed a new phenomenon. It has got nothing to do with how Pakistan was created. I mean, in her mind, Jinnah, the reasons for Jinnah and the then leadership to create Pakistan got nothing to do with religion. I mean, it was a very pragmatic creation. Pakistan was created for Muslims of India and not for Islam. Now, when the question that I ask, however, is that was that differentiation, is that differentiation that natural and that possible? Are we as sure at perhaps Dr. Jalal that there was clarity in the mind of the leadership, of the then leadership, about creating, of the use of religion for creating of a homeland for the Muslims of the Indian subcontinent? I mean, in fact, if you go through the book, another recent book, a very excellent book by Faisal Devji on Pakistan, the Muslim Zion, you come across a citation by Jinnah, arguing about how a country was created. I mean, his target was saving 70 million Muslims by sacrificing 20 million Muslims. But the argument there is that for Jinnah, religion, he looked at religion as a legal identity, something which would replace ethnic identity. And there was this tension between this new identity and the ethnic identities that were there. Now, we're constantly in Pakistan reminded of that famous speech that Jinnah made. You're free to go to your temples, you're free to go to your mosque or any other place of worship in the state of Pakistan. You may belong to any religion or caste or creed that has nothing to do with the business of the state. He was probably reminded of the Roman Catholic and Protestant relationship in Europe. He further added, thank God we're not starting in those days. We're starting in the days where there is no discrimination, no distinction between one community and another, no discrimination between one caste or creed and another. We are starting with this fundamental principle that we are all citizens and equal citizens of one state. However, how much of that was really internalized by Jinnah himself? Because later on March 28, 1948, Jinnah said, and I quote, Pakistan is the embodiment of the unity of the Muslim nation, and so it must remain. That unity we are true Muslims must jealously guard and preserve. If we begin to think of ourselves as Bengalis, Punjabis, Sindhis, etc., first Muslims and Pakistanis only incidentally, then Pakistan is bound to disintegrate. For me, this March 1948 speech to the Bar Association in Karachi probably did not reflect the clarity which liberals and some of the liberals in Pakistan claim they felt with the September speech, the earlier speech. This was naturally a very tactical use of religion. Religion being used, to drive politics, and that is how subsequent Pakistani leadership has used religion, in that tactical formula. However, without understanding, without probably appreciating how, the legitimacy that Jinnah had was used to present him as the sole spokesman and also to market a particular ideology. But that ideology was, I call it a beetle leaf kind of a formula. It's not a circle, it didn't come back. The legitimacy was needed for ideology, but then that legitimacy was never regained. Nobody ever had that kind of legitimacy. And it was always the ideology which was needed to gain legitimacy. So government after government, regime after regime used religion to gain that legitimacy. And we continue. I'm reminded of another great speech by Honorable Sir Muhammad Zafarullah Khan was Pakistan's first foreign minister. This was a speech that he made in 1949 to the Constituent Assembly, in which he said, "Sir, the conception that religion and politics occupy distinct spheres which should not be permitted to overlap is born of failure to grasp the full significance of religion. What is religion and what is its function? Religion is the way of life that should enable such individual to attain the highest possible development of his spiritual, moral, physical, and intellectual faculties. Its function is to establish and maintain the most harmonious relationship between man and his maker on the one hand, and between man and man in all aspects of the relationship on the other. Politics is only one aspect of the relationship between man and man. Those who seek to draw a distinction between the spheres of religion and the sphere of politics are being naturally exclusive, put too narrow construction upon functions of religion." I'm sure at that point in time, what Sir Zafarullah Khan did not realize was how this very interpretation, how this very formula of mixing religion and politics would be used against him. In 1949, Pakistani state then establishes religion as it's formally establishes at its ground norm. We move on. Other similar tactical moves are made using religion. 1956 Constitution, for example, it admits 5 tenets of Islam as being critical to the Pakistani state. Again, 1964. In fact, what is very interesting then is that 1958 we have the first martial law military government led by General Ayub Khan, who's perhaps the only person in Pakistan's history who at some point in his career did understand the need to separate religion from politics. He had the greatest clarity. But, and therefore, what we had in 1962 was a constitution which declared Pakistan as a republic, not an Islamic republic. However, when he had to give in, when he had to surrender, and Islamic provisions were added in 1964, they were added with, I mean, they signified a greater compromise. Not only were Islamic provisions added, in fact, with greater vengeance. They had the Islamic Ideological Council as an advisory body to overlook constitution making, to ensure that all laws that were made were in line with Islamic provisions. The state, then what we see is state very gradually using religion for its other tactical purposes. I mean, General Sher Ali Khan, for example, he found that Islamic ideology was critical for Pakistan. General Sher Ali Khan is the same person who was then, who was key in making the plan for the 1965 Operation Gibraltar. In East Pakistan, there was partnerships which started to emerge between the religious right and the state and its military. In East Pakistan, for instance, Jamaat-e-Islami's Al-Badr and Al-Shams were made to fight enemies of the state. Now, at this point in time, what is also interesting to remember is that we are looking at a different kind of an elite. You see, these are the years when elite, you see the shift, you begin to see the movement. Now, before I start talking about that movement, let me again share with you the story. When I was talking to one of the former naval chiefs who had joined the Pakistan Navy in very early 1950s, in the first few years of the country's existence. He talked about, he happily talked about having no inhibitions, no biases. He said, we'd go, we were trained in Britain, and we'd have ham sandwiches and whatever. So That bias, which you see emerging later, I mean, those inhibitions, they were just not there. But then we see things began to shift. Now, at that stage, you have new elite and you have the old elite. The new elite are, if you look at, for example, historian Ilyas Chatta's work on Punjab, and you see the people who made money, the new elites that were formed as a result of the loot and plunder of 1947. These are different kind of people who are added into the decision making. But you also had the older elite who were not, I mean, when we look at Pakistan, it's not just the liberal professionals that we need to focus on. There are others as well. There were the religious elite, the mullahs, the religious right, of course. Then you also had the peers. I mean, the peers, the keepers of the shrines, who still have, to a certain degree, some control. You see, a share of their advertisement as well. But you had peers. There were, these shrines who were, they had revivalist ideology as well. Yet they were very focused on Islam being central to Pakistan identity. And when we talk about liberalism in Pakistan, we forget about the role these people had to play. Secondly, the peers and the feudals were, they interacted, they were connected with each other as well. They had common interests. They certainly had interests in seeing, for example, in Sindh, the Sindhi landowners, they were very interested in seeing the Hindu, the Hindu banya, the money lender, the businessman leave. And so it was in their interest to pursue a certain kind of ideology and insist on it. That, that Pakistan, for example, 1949, Sir Sikandar Hayat Khan, Sir Shaukat Hayat Khan, he was there when there was a whole discussion which happened about, which took place this was not 1949, this was 1945 in Sial Sharif, one of the Chishti silsilas, Chishti shrines, where Sardar Shaukat Hayat Khan promised that Pakistan would not deviate from the path of Islam. So they were committed. This was an elite which was committed to religious identity. And of course, by 1970s, 1960s, other things were happening. 1950s, for example, you had the anti-Ahmadi riots which took place. There was Majlis-e-Ihrar, which was very dominant, and Majlis-e-Ihrar had been in conversation with Jinnah, in a very tactical conversation with Jinnah before he died. Ulama, as Dr. Manzuruddin Ahmad writes, ulama by 1960s had turned into a pressure group. They've not, I mean, there is this very clear divide between ideological politics and electoral politics. They've always been kept separate. And increasingly, the religious right has not engaged with electoral politics. Yet they have dominated the conversation in the state and the society. Then 1974-2001, you see other set of changes would start to happen. This is a period when Pakistan, I believe, turns into a case of weak nationalism, strong religionism. Now, earlier on, when I say it was weak nationalism and weak religionism, it was because of the factors which have been identified by Dr. Jalal, that you had some level of leadership which was liberal, so it was not entirely a theocratic state. The formula was not entirely theocratic; they didn't support it. But now in 1974, that began to change. I mean, with the first, which is the anti-MDA law, the state for the first time formally acquired the role of judging, sitting on judgment on people's faith. Additions were made to anti-Ahmadiyya law in 1984 under Ziaul Haq, according to which Ahmadis would be punished if caught praying, saying their prayers or behaving like Muslims. So there were, and these were punishments which were added to the penal code, the police law. Other interesting things also began to happen, again, very tactical use by the state. Early 1980s, we see birth of sectarian politics, birth of sectarian groups, which was then to counter initially the impact of Iranian revolution in 1979. And although we see the Pakistani state kind of gradually, but much later, shifting its position towards the towards Iran and Iranian revolution, yet it was also supporting these groups which were much more focused on the sectarian divide. 1980s, 1979, post-1979, you see Afghanistan blowing up in a phase, Pakistan coming together with the United States to fight the war in Afghanistan. But this is not when the battle had started in Afghanistan. The battle in Afghanistan had started much earlier, towards the mid of 1970s or end of 1970s. That's when various Afghan warlords had begun to be trained by Islamabad to protect itself from, from the policies of Kabul, unfriendly regimes in Kabul. Then, something which is much closer to our memory is Zia's period of Islamization, the jihad of the 1980s in Afghanistan, 1990s, the support that was provided to the Taliban, and of course the same period, Kargil War of 1999. Now, while all of this was happening, in terms of societal move, you again see movement. 1970s and 1980s, we see a totally different kind of elite emerge. 1970s, as a result of Bhutto's, kind of semi-revolution, but 1980s, Ziaul Haq, in order to counter what he thought were remnants of the old elite, the old feudal elite, he'd created a new, a new patronage network, a new clientele, which were basically trader merchants, urban trader merchants, a new set of petty bourgeois. And if you refer to Bhutto before Ziaul Haq, I mean, there was an entire 7 years of Islamic socialism. Islam was very much ingrained in the polity. In the 1980s, we see the Zia regime connect with Jamaat Islami and Jamaat-e-Ulama Islam and other religious parties. He brings around major changes in the legal and economic system. There is blasphemy law, which was introduced in 1987. And to date, from 1987 to date, there are 1,043 cases of blasphemy. Out of which, interestingly, major cases are in about 800 cases are from Punjab. Another 300 are from Sindh. This is a period where we see the end of the old elite and beginning of a new one. The politicians in Pakistan that you see, for example, we see today, they are a set of people who were generated in 1980s. They came out of the 1980s. Totally, this was totally a new elite, new source of funding, new sources of financing, new sources of support. And 1990s, I mean, I'm late when I talk about this period, I'm talking about 1971 to 2001, and this is a period where 1980s get a lot of coverage because of Ziaul Haq, but 1990s we hear much less about it. But a lot of things are happening. I mean, Islamic social movements pick up in the 1990s. I mean, there is the Taliban in Afghanistan on one hand, supported by the Pakistani state. Internally, you have, you know, movements like Al-Huda, like Tablighi Jamaat, really, you know, expanding, and you have Hizb ut-Tahrir and others who begin, you know, to spread out. Now, finally, let me go to this period, which I call proto-strong nationalism, strong religionism. There was a purpose behind. There was a, you know, there was a pattern to all of this madness. When the state was systematically using religion, its primary goal was perhaps the same as we saw Jinnah talk about in 1948. The urge to create a much more central nationalism, which would gel the Pakistani state together. I mean, 1971, Pakistan had lost its eastern wing. And hence, you know, and since then there has been this suspicion of all ethnic nationalisms. But still, there was this urge to find something which would gel the people together. Now, I'm afraid that that gelling together takes the form of religious nationalism. If you look at, for instance, a lot of these militant outfits, the way they're expanding into areas like Sindh and Balochistan, one of the casualties of this expansion in these areas is ethnic nationalism. I'll give you one example, and you know, you can, I mean, your guess is as good as mine, that, you know, what is behind it, you know, who's pushing it, but, you know, you see certain benefits coming out of it. For example, the new head of Al-Qaeda in the Indian subcontinent has increasingly started to engage in a conversation about Baloch nationalism. Al-Qaeda in that part of the world has in fact started to talk about, write about. I mean, they've engaged in an intellectual exercise where they, you know, where they begin to write about Baloch nationalism, the need for a separate Baloch nationalism. Now, what it does is that the genuine secular Baloch nationalism is going to be a casualty. It's going to be a victim to all of this. And of course, post-2014, there's always this need of these proxies. I mean, more than any time in the past, the connection between the state and its different components and these militant outfits seems to be pretty solid. I mean, I'm not amazed when I see a photograph in which Jamaat-ud-Dawa Lashkar-e-Taiba is actually popularizing and marketing the Pakistani military. Now, what you see emerging out of this kind of politics is active radicalism. That has been increased. You have greater cases of violence against minorities. I mean, it's a different kind of, a new kind of society which is emerging. There is more sectarian violence. And what is more interesting, I think what is more troubling to me or any observer is not just the connection between the military and the militant outfits and continued connection, but also the connect between the emerging middle classes and the militant madrasa network. For me, that is extremely problematic. I mean, when you look at Sindh, which is considered as, you know, the land of Sufis and shrines. Now, increasingly what you see happening is that in the past 10 years, there has been a mushroom growth of questionable madrasas. These are not madrasas which were connected, which were rooted in the community. These are madrasas which have been parachuted with Qatari or Gulf or, you know, Saudi or some money. You know, the source of funding is external, but the political support is very internal. And as a result, it has begun to change the face of the society. You have big mafias, you have, you know, who seek help of these militant outfits. You have the old elite, you know, who are diminishing in their power, who are also clinging to these new power centers. I mean, I call the militants the neo-feudals. They are the ones who now have the source of power to negotiate between the people and the state. I mean, if you look at the concept of feudal historically, what was it? It was somebody who interacted between the colonial state and the people, who negotiated between the colonial state and the people. Now, he's lost his legitimacy, which rested in religion. When I look at extremism, when I look at the development, I see it also as the new modernity. In most places, South Punjab, Sindh, these are places, and Punjab, central Punjab and North Punjab, feudalism has kind of almost melted away. South Punjab, it's melting away, Sindh also it's melting away. But the problem is there's no other institution which is strong and viable enough to take the position of that institution. And so, you have these new actors who have the power, who have the legitimacy drawn from religion, because this is the only ticket which sells. And then they also have force behind them. And therefore, they're coming together. So the new middle class that you see supports these networks. I mean, you go around, I had gone around interviewing people in central Punjab, in Sindh, and it was very interesting. I mean, you talk to these trader merchants who would hate to give taxes to the state, you know, would immediately shirk and, but they give, it's not that they don't pay, they gave hundreds of thousands of rupees to madrasas and militants. Now, the number of reasons for that: one, it's to gain legitimacy, social legitimacy. You know, it makes you look good if you're paying to these madrasas. Secondly, you actually believe in these causes, and you think that these guys are actually doing, you know, if they're fighting jihad, if they're sending somebody to fight a war, they are probably doing something good. And therefore, you know, let me perform this duty. And thirdly, it is, you know, it's you know, you probably feel purified when you're giving away. So there has been a gradual social shift which is taking place. Now, it's not that everybody is becoming a militant. In some ways, the Sufi shrines and Sufis, they're also there. Those businesses are also running, but they have less potential to engage with the society and block these movements, these right-wing religious movements. And my argument here is that it's, while poverty, you know, a popular argument is it's because of lack of education and poverty, my argument on the other hand is that poverty may be a contributor, but it's not a driving force. It is the way power has been imagined in the state of Pakistan from the very beginning, which gives strength to these movements and which is, you know, giving them their nuisance value. As a result of all of that, of course, what we see is a shift. It is a change in how Pakistan feels and looks. Jinnah is no longer this man, with the dog, playing with a poodle and smoking a cigar and drinking his whiskey. He's probably a man who's grown a beard, has been forced to grow a beard. I mean, if you look at some of the presence of militancy through central Punjab, I mean, this is a billboard which is public property, by the way. It's government of Pakistan. Advertising Jamaat al-Dawa and call for jihad. So these are new forces which have emerged. The old and new elite are partnering. I mean, the peers and shrines who should be naturally opposing these forces are no longer doing it. The political parties are again very comfortably, I mean, they're in awe of these networks, not to kind of touch them. And there are new forms of militants which are now coming into action. Of course, you've heard of ISIS. They're about the different figures. There's one estimate that there are about 600 people who have gone from central Punjab and Sindh, from Thatta, Karachi, Faisalabad, Gujranwala, Lahore, to Syria, to fight in Syria. Then you have the Al-Qaeda in the Indian subcontinent. And there are places where you can see shades of grey, which is what I call state patronage. This is a new madrasa under construction, Jaish Muhammad in Bahawalpur. This is Sindh. How do you tackle this issue? Where do we go from here? I mean, there is something troubling which is happening. Where do we go from here? And in fact, instead of giving an answer, let me pose two questions. I mean, these are questions which I constantly pose to myself and I pose to my audience as well. Is it possible to solve this problem without engaging with religion? Do we have to? I mean, there has to be some revivalism. There has to be some modern rationality which needs to be brought into the entire conversation of religion. There has to be a division between politics and the use of religion by the state, even within a religious framework. But the next question is, in today's Pakistan, do we even have that space for that rational debate? I mean, the fear of blasphemy, the fear of being accused of something is so fearful that a conversation does not even begin to happen. I mean, the great Dr. Fazlur Rahman, he had to kind of leave Pakistan and he was in Chicago for a very long time. Then you have another cleric, rational, modern, Javed Hamdi, who had to leave the country. Yet, I do not see a third possibility, because what is definite is that secularism, traditional secularism and liberalism in Pakistan are gone, they're dead. How do we begin to imagine it? And I think this is where I need help of my audience to help me think about the way forward. Thank you so much.